Hey, y'all, Gary here with Tennessee Stands. Have something a little different for you today. We're doing an interview with 3 employees from ORNL, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And ORNL is a federal contractor. So they are one of the companies that are exempt from the law that just passed here in Tennessee in order so that they can comply with requirements per their federal contract to coerce, I'll just say, their employees to get the shot in order to keep their job. And currently, there is a group of employees from ORNL that have filed a lawsuit against ORNL over their rights to make their own medical decisions and over their religious liberties in terms of refusing the shot. And so I want to bring on today Rob, Jordan, and Stephanie from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Y'all, thank you so much for joining us. And look, glad that you're here and taking an opportunity to share your story. I think it's critical for people across the state of Tennessee to see faces, see real people, and understand these specific circumstances as to how this law is impacting the everyday life of Tennesseans. So thank you all for coming on. Jordan, I want to start with you. And if you would just sort of share a little bit about how the lawsuit came to be, where things are, some of the specific circumstances surrounding that, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so ORNL is managed by the UT Battelle Partnership, which is a limited liability private corporation, and they announced that they were going to mandate the COVID vaccine as a rule of employment on August the 26th. Subsequently, September the 21st, they had some town halls kind of rolling out what the exemption process would look like, what some of the reasonable accommodations would be, such as regular testing, masking, social distancing. ORNL, UT Battelle has been pushing to bring everybody back on site, so a return to on-site operations. But for the most part, they're subsequent to DOE rules, which are that currently they're at a max teleworking. And so we've pretty much sat pretty well at a 50-50, 60-40 split on-site work since August. And so we had a deadline to submit our exemptions for medical and religious, September the 15th. And the morning of September the 16th, Dr. Thomas Zachariah, the lab director for ORNL, announced that there were so many religious exemptions and that religious exemptions needed to be prepared to be on unpaid leave through the end of the pandemic. Now that was the first that we had heard of that accommodation, and it was a little startling.
And the issue was not that whether or not a religious exemption should be offered. It turned out that there were too many, and they began to feel uncomfortable with how many religious exemptions that were coming through.
Yeah, it wasn't clear at that point. It became clear, and so they had in-person interviews for 2 days, and on the 3rd day they canceled all interviews. They were in person as opposed to virtual. And reportedly, there was 2 individuals who had tested positive for COVID, and so they decided to shut down all of the interviews for safety instead of going to virtual. And so they canceled the interviews and subsequently announced that afternoon they approved all religious exemptions, and they said the reasonable accommodation that would not present an undue burden to UT Battelle was unpaid leave.
So just to be clear for the folks out there, they granted your religious exemption, but the reasonable accommodation provided to you was that you can't come to work and you won't get paid. That about sums it up?
Correct.
Okay. in order to protect your religious liberty. That's incredible and ridiculous. So subsequently, there was a lawsuit filed, right?
Yeah.
All right, because there was a deadline set for October 15th.
Yes.
The judge initially granted a temporary restraining order, which gave you a 14-day reprieve, but then did not grant the preliminary injunction.
Correct. Yeah.
And so now you're home, you're out of a job, you're in the middle of a lawsuit, and you're waiting on relief from the courts.
Correct. Yeah. So we're still employees of UT Battelle, but we are in the process of seeking, temporary employment and getting that approved through their Office of General Counsel and our leadership, so that we can keep our livelihood as we keep our jobs effectively.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but clearly, one of the reasons that you're in this position is because when we went into special session, I would imagine that the three of you had some hope. You had some kind of expectation that the General Assembly was going to pass a law which might give you some protections as citizens of the state of Tennessee against these mandates. You would be able to keep your job and not be coerced to have this shop, but that didn't happen. We left you hanging. We left you at the whim of Uncle Joe and what he decided you should have as an employee. So, Stephanie, I'll go to you. I know that in our prior conversation, we had, or some of you had contacted some of your legislators in terms of asking for how to handle the situation, asking that someone be your advocate, perhaps. How did that process go? Tell us a little bit about how that went down.
Well, Gary, as Jordan mentioned, this kind of started for us in August 26th was when our initial mandate was announced, and kind of knew immediately that, I had religious beliefs that were in conflict with this vaccine. And so I knew immediately I'd have to file for a religious exemption. And as we sort of went through the religious exemption process at the lab, I began to realize that this was going to be an adversarial process, right? They weren't inclined to listen to or to really respect my sincerely held religious beliefs. And so once I kind of started figuring some of that out, I panicked and I realized, there's a good chance I could lose my job over this. And so I started reaching out to every legislator I could think of. So my state representative, Michelle Carringer, my state senator, Becky Duncan Massey, reached out to Bill Lee's office, and I think probably most of our group was doing the same. We were all, frantically reaching out to our legislators, but I think quickly found out that there was no help to be found from that quarter, right? So we were receiving form emails back that clearly missed the point of our question, which was not about the vaccine mandate, which was about, how can you help us with preserving our religious liberties, preserving our right to work under this with religious exemption process. So we're getting form emails back. The emails we are getting back are saying, well, we wish we could help and we support everybody's right to choose, but, we do think everyone should take the vaccine if you're able to, and, good luck. And so that was sort of a dead end. Yeah.
Pause. So you're a Tennessean reaching out to your state legislators, asking, how can you help me preserve my constitutional rights as a citizen of this state from being infringed upon? And part of the response that you got from members of our legislature was that, well, you should probably take the vaccine. That was part of the response.
It always is, Gary, because our legislators want to, they want to cut down the middle, right? So their typical response in their form emails, which is what we get a lot of, their typical response is, we believe you have the right to choose. We hope you'll choose the vaccine. I think that's similar to even what Bill Lee said, right? So,
yeah, especially with the mask thing, one of the things that he's been on the record saying is that, well, I support a parent's right to choose whether or not their kid wears a mask. But we all know that masking is the most safe and effective way at preventing the spread of COVID in our schools. So children should wear a mask. Yeah, it's all this constant duplicitous speech.
So, once we realized our legislators weren't really going to be there for us, I think a lot of us were watching this special session. We were hoping that, through, the mercy of God and through their actions, that they would sort of change their path, that they would put protections in for us in this bill. There are other states. Montana has a ban on the federal contractor mandate. So we knew that was possible.
That's
and
right.
we hoped that, they would see us, they knew about our situation, and we hoped that they would do something for us. But I think you know how that turned out.
So one of the things as in this discussion, then when we talked previously, that sort of hit my mind is, so you waited, the help didn't come, you're in limbo, you're home, you're not working. And I began to think, well, gosh, the three of you and all the employees, almost everyone that works for ORNL, has gone through a fairly high degree of education to get where you are. In other words, there's been a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of time spent getting to where you are. And you operate in very specialized fields. And I've been thinking, well, because the conversation always is, well, liberty, the business has a right to do whatever, and the employee should just go find another job. Well, how easy is it for you to just go find another job? Especially here in Tennessee, much less across the country, in the fields that you work in, to replace a job that you've had for years, and all of a sudden the circumstances have changed. So that's sort of part of the question, and also how has this personally affected you, just as a person having to walk through this? Who wants to take a stab at that? Rob, I see a smile. I think Rob's going to take a stab at this one.
Well, so technically, I'd like to hear from Stephanie regarding the professional aspect, because Jordan and I have backgrounds in computer science. And so it's a very broad, in-demand position. That said, we have spent our entire professional careers working in the lab system. So it is a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge in the way the government works. And so it is very difficult to just mentally think about changing and pursuing, technology in industry. They're quite a bit different. But I'll speak to on a personal note. This in 2 months has been extremely trying. I mean, personally, physically, I've lost 10% of my body mass. Sleepless nights. You just don't have an appetite. You're not eating. Getting the group organized and hearing everyone's story day in and day out, late into the night, early in the morning. People who are scared. They don't necessarily know who to go to, what to do. They're being, the amount of pressure being exerted on these individuals, tremendous, just tremendous. And all of that to say that you're in it yourself. And so it's difficult to have spent the entire professional career at an institute and then to have developed a level of trust, particularly me as a group leader at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. You feel a part of the company. You feel you're doing your bit, and all of a sudden, in a matter of weeks, to be ostracized and to have no say effectively, it turns your world upside down, and it's very confusing. It's very frustrating. It's very personally overwhelming, and it's incredibly overwhelming and disappointing in how this didn't have to be this way.
Right. So here's the thing. So the three of you right now are in this position. We're waiting on the courts. What's the outlook right now? I mean, what do things look like? What's the next deadline? What's the drop dead date? I mean, what happens?
Jordan, you want to speak to that?
So right now, we are working our way through the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission process. And so whenever there's a charge of discrimination, the U.S. federal entity named the EEOC gets first right on resolving the dispute. And so the group is working its way through that process. So November 1st, we were placed on unpaid leave. Now, the good news, the silver lining of sorts, is that the EEOC has recognized the large number of complaints being filed against UT Patel, and so they have actually grouped us. And so initially, we were filing for intake interviews that stretched through the end of November, the end of February. And so the fact they actually identified everybody who was filing, grouped us, and we're hoping to finish those charges here very soon. And so that's giving us quite a bit of hope, just from the, it feels like there's something wrong, and we're getting a lot of affirmation that there is something wrong, both in the judge's conclusion, even though he denied our preliminary injunction. He also said it was unfathomable that an entity such as UT Patel would do such a thing. It was a shocking indifference to these employees, and that these employees deserve better, as do all of the employees associated with UT Patel. So, it was very affirming that there was real, it's very tough to believe how this employer is treated us in this way. So it's been affirming, but there is this road ahead of us that we are still trying to understand. And this is my first foray into all things legal and Title VII and ADA. So it's been quite the learning curve.
And one of the things, if I remember in our conversation, I mean, your lawsuit revolves around the religious exemption piece. And I think, if I remember right, the part that the EEOC has grabbed onto, and perhaps the judge that they found egregious, was that each individual that submitted for a religious exemption was not allowed the opportunity to have their individual case heard, that there was just this blanket treatment of everyone according to their religious exemption. And that specifically in terms of a First Amendment free exercise of religion is what is so egregious, because in that moment, you've now put all of these people in one camp. You've determined that by rights of conscience that they've all come to the same conclusion by the same means, in the same way, in the same manner, and put them all on unpaid leave without the ability for them to defend their religious beliefs individually. I think that's the piece that the EEOC is like, wait a minute, that doesn't follow federal law. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah. So the detail, the delicate situation is that they began to evaluate our sincerely held religious beliefs, which is, I believe it's effectively kind of optional in the process, right? So those companies that want to scrutinize individuals' religious beliefs have that right to do that kind of evaluation. Now, it was fairly adversarial going through. I was one of the individuals who went through the interview, and it wasn't anything pleasant. And so, some employers can do that, but the real thing is that I believe Title VII says that you have to evaluate each employee's accommodation on an individual basis. And so there is this de minimis burden where if that individual to accommodate them would cost something that was more than nothing.
Yeah, we created undue burden. Yeah.
Right. And so they could place us on paid leave, but they didn't evaluate us on an individual basis. So there were those who were hired remotely in the last year, who have been working, never set foot on campus, who were put on unpaid leave that are absolutely zero burden. And because they were identified as a religious exemption. Now, we do have medical exemptions in our group as well. And so all of even though many came forward with doctor's notes, most of them were, allergies to vaccines, history with sensitivities with taking vaccines, or heart conditions that the doctors said, no, we do not recommend that they receive this vaccine. That those would be effectively long-term or permanent medical exemptions. Those were also denied.
Right. The only medical exemptions that were accepted were medical exemptions that were deemed to only be temporary. If someone came with a medical exemption and that was to be, look, this is my permanent condition, I can never take this vaccine, that medical exemption was denied. Right.
Now, there's a caveat in that they point to the CDC. So the CDC is deciding your healthcare decisions. So it wasn't just long-term. So there's rumor of one permanent exemption based on the CDC's acknowledgement of forget what the compound is, but it causes anaphylactic shock. And so there's reportedly one permanent exemption. So it is, if it's not contraindicative to the CDC guidance, then they'll accept it.
All right. So just want to give each of you a shot if you want, just a parting thought here as we come to a close. And in just a minute, before we close, I'm going to put up a web link because I know that y'all are involved in a very expensive lawsuit that look, this is another thing, by the way, that we've raised this stink about quite a bit in terms of the legislature's responsibility to protect individual liberties, because part of the argument is that, well, look, we're going to pass a law and these people can just go sue and then it's up to the court. Or just the idea has always been, well, this is freedom. Freedom is letting people do what they want and letting judges determine between the two parties. The problem I have with that is that a legislature's responsibility is not to leave that discernment up to the court as to whether or not someone has rights. The responsibility of a state legislature is to acknowledge and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state and pass laws that secure the rights of individuals and not leave individuals at the whim of the court. One of the reasons is why? Well, because not every citizen has the ability to spend the however many tens of thousands of dollars it takes to ask a judge whether or not the judge feels they have any rights to protect in the first place. To me, that whole spin that's been put out by our legislature here in Tennessee is terrible. It's wrong. And it is a derelict of duty, in my opinion, to the oath that they've taken. So I'm sad to see, number one, that you're in that position. But anyway, I say all that to say we want to put this web link up, and for folks who want to give and help contribute, we'll mention that in a moment. But before we head out, just final parting thoughts for Tennesseans to hear from you.
Well, Gary, I'll tell you one thing I'm passionate about, which is talking about the people that this affects. So you've got 3 people on the screen here, but we're a class of 100, and there's all sorts of different folks here. There are folks like electricians who, yeah, they can get a job somewhere else, but they used to be an electrician working on the world's fastest supercomputer, right? There are folks who have children, one child, 6 children, and their source of income is completely gone. And they don't have a way to get another, their skills aren't easily transferable. So there's just so many people that this affects, and beyond even just our class, all of the folks at the lab, these subcontractors, it's filtering down to them. Other national labs are watching us. What we're doing here, the battle we're fighting has implications beyond, I think, just the people it's harming today. But, when I'm getting ready to go sleep tonight, the people that it's harming right now are always in my prayers. They're struggling, and, we're hoping that, help will come from somewhere.
That's good.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that subcontractor point, in that allowing UT Patel to treat us the way they have is setting a standard that all of the subcontractors, which are many to Oak Ridge National Laboratory, are taking into account and are reflecting in their standards. As a perfect example is there's a young woman who works at the cafeteria at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and she is due, she's pregnant and due in January. Because of UT Patel's policy, all of the cafeteria, her employer is going to require her to be vaccinated as of December the 8th. And if she is not, she will be fired.
And to be clear there, she's not even a direct employee of the federal contractor. She's employed by someone providing a service to the federal contractor. So like y'all are saying, these implications go far and wide.
Yes. And that was a major letdown in the Tennessee law, is that we had hoped there would be at least a degree of scrutiny as to the implementation, the non-covered versus covered employees, and how the mandate would apply to those. The federal mandate does not require the non-covered employees be vaccinated, and that is where the cafeteria, I believe, is one of those examples. But it sets the precedent, and it's setting a standard. It sets the example, let's say. And my hope is that all East Tennesseans would have a better example to set than to treat our neighbors this way, at this capacity. We get out and we help each other, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of race, religion, any of that.
The volunteer state. Can you imagine that, right? Rob, final words.
Yeah, Gary, I really want to thank you for having us on, and it while this entire period has been extremely trying, lots of emotions, lots of hardship. Obviously, we ask for prayers and thoughts for the families that are affected. We love our jobs, we love our coworkers, we love our Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and we're really praying that we can continue to work there. So not only keep us in your thoughts and prayers, but we also ask that you pray for the Oak Ridge National Laboratory leadership, that they may have a change of heart, reconsider the actions that they're taking. This is very difficult for us who we're passionate about what we do at the lab. It only compounds with the collateral of our colleagues that we've been forced to leave behind, having to pick up the things that we were previously carrying. And so it's a really unfortunate situation. And I see there that, we're in a legal fight. And we also ask that you support us financially. We've got a Give, Send, Go campaign, and that's located the link below. That's givesendgo.com/UTB discriminates. Really appreciate you having us on, and thank you. God bless.
Yeah, listen, the three of you and all of the employees that are fighting for their rights, there at ORNL. You're on the front lines. I mean, there are, with this law passing, there are so many Tennesseans, quite frankly, that are just applauding, so thankful. I mean, they've been rescued, right? And the problem is these healthcare workers, federal contractors that we've just left to the federal government, and that's what I want people to see. I personally, and I know so many that follow Tennessee Stands are thankful to you to put yourself in the position of fighting the fight. Believe me when I say I understand the pressures that brings and the scrutiny that may bring to you personally from relationships, friends, others in your community. So thank you for walking through that, because if we do not stand up together and fix this now and defend these liberties now, we won't get them back. I've said this so often in places that I've spoken. I mean, can you imagine? You guys have gone, I bet you've all gone to school for a very long time to do what you do. But if you can think far enough back to 5th grade, when we sort of begin learning civics and some semblance of world history, and think as far back as you can, I mean, beyond the Civil War and England or the Romans, Greco-Roman period, and just as far back as you can go in human history. When was there ever a time that a ruler, a monarch, a government, some type of leadership structure took liberty, took something from the people over which they governed or ruled, and then one day on their own just gave it back? It's never happened. In all of human history, men and women have never just been willfully given back their liberty. It's always had to be taken back. It's always had to be stood for against those who would seek to implement tyranny over those that they rule. And so I hope that people watch this video and see what you're doing and realize in their own spheres of influence and in the own little world that they live in, that we all have to stand up and protect our liberty and defend our Constitution. No one's going to do it for us, apparently, as you well know. So I encourage everyone who's watching, look, you see the website below, gibsongo.com/UTB discriminates. And if you can, I know these folks are working to raise about $300,000 to protect them in this legal battle. So if you're able, please give, support them. And wherever you see these battles taking place, support these fights, guys, because this is where the rubber meets the road. And I commend these three for being on here. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And we wish you all the best. And we will be praying for you and the employees at ORNL. God be with you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.